Good evening, Madam Mayor, members of the council. On a couple of previous occasions, we've made reports to the Public Works Finance Committee about the status of the surface water reservoir feasibility study, a couple of different points along in the process.
Randy, could you pull that door closed just a tad, please? Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. At this point, we are quite a bit further along in the study, so I thought it would be appropriate to bring a report to the full council. And part of the reasoning for that is the current contract with Graphics has really two parts to it. The first is Part A, as noted above. The Part A scope of services is nearing completion. We have a draft document now that reflects the last major task within the study. There were a couple of previous documents that went with that as well. From this point, once Part A is completed, and there's a couple of steps left to complete that work that I will go over, then we need to make some decisions about whether we proceed with Part B within the contract. And Part B has a general scope outline within the services contract, but we would need a defined scope and budget to continue on. So at this point, I thought I'd give you just a general briefing on where we are right now. This will probably take 20 or 30 minutes, I would imagine. There's a lot of material to cover, and I'll try to keep it moving along, but also want to answer any questions that you may have.
Okay.
I'm going to start with a little summary of what the study entails. As part of the work, Graphics identified 19 basins on Moscow Mountain on north and south sides of the mountain, so really looked all the way around. From those 19 basins, with consultation with staff, we narrowed that down to 4 basins for further review. There were 3 methods of use identified, and by use I mean how would the water be utilized within the city of Moscow, in what form, so we'll touch on that a little bit later. 2 methods of treatment were discussed. We'll get into that also. We considered 2 types of dams, and these really relate to height rather than style of construction, if you will. The study also included some planning level cost estimates. These were done through URS as a sub-consultant to Graphics. They are out of their, I believe, Portland office. With all of that information in hand, 8 alternatives were presented within the draft Task 4 report as we have it today. We'll touch on what those are so you at least have some general understanding of some of the concepts. The report, this section of the report is actually prepared by, just drew a blank, SPF Water Engineering out of Boise in consultation with Graphics and URS. Also included in this stage is an assessment of potential constraints that could occur for these sites as we move forward, presuming we do, and some review of the water rights that exist within the different drainage basins that are being considered. Help orient you a little bit, this is an aerial overview of Moscow Mountain, and the pointer is having difficulties. We'll try this one. The red outlined areas here and the purple outlined areas, these reflect the drainage basins on the south side of the mountain. The ridge line runs about here, and then you also see some of these purple basins defined on the north side, so 19 in all. This was one of the early maps that identified potential reservoir sites, these kind of whitish blue areas you see here, varying in size at the ends of all the more significant basins, if you will. The number of reservoir sites on some of these where you see 2 or 3 was ultimately reduced to just 1 within a particular basin. In the process of the study, narrowing it from 19 to 14, or to 4, excuse me, these were the 4 that were defined. The Flanagan Basin to the north is the largest and really has the greatest potential for large-scale facilities. Hatter Long Creek here is actually 2 basins that we combined into one. with the idea that one of these two sites would be selected as a reservoir location, whichever one seemed to make the most sense based on a number of different parameters. One of the advantages of the Hatter Long Basin really is ownership. There's a lot of consolidated ownership between the University of Idaho and some of the timber companies up on top of the mountain. South Fork Palouse on the south side was also addressed, the basin that's the closest to the city of Moscow that seemed to have merit within the study, and then the Felton Creek Basin off to the east side of the mountain. Just zooming in just a little bit, again, South Fork here with the reservoir site, Felton to the east, the Flanagan Creek, again the largest basin considered, and the Hatter Long Creek combination. On this kind of a case, we might see a situation where water from one basin could be diverted into the other basin where the reservoir facility is located if there was a need to supplement the amount of water supply available. For the various sites, the study also took a look at how would we convey the water from the reservoirs back to the city. For those on the north side, Hatter and Flanagan complexes, there would be some form of a pipe system that would either follow the existing roads or perhaps a little cross-country alternative here, and would work its way, in this case, 4 Mile and Saddle Ridge, Flanagan Creek also working a similar route, and then coming down Highway 95 into the north end of the city. For those sites on the south, we would be looking at either a piped system running from Felton across in the area of Darby Road into the city, Mountain View region, or possibly on the South Fork, it could be piped, but it also could be a surface flow utilizing the South Fork of the Palouse to a point of withdrawal down at the south end of the city. And those options come up as we get into detail a little bit later. In terms of method of use, we really looked at 3 options that were defined within the study. The first would be, I think, the one most people would directly relate to, which is direct use in the potable system. So essentially, you take the water from surface water reservoir, you treat it, and then you put it directly into the distribution network that serves the city. Right now, the city of Moscow uses just over 2,500 acre-feet per year of potable water supply. The sites that we're looking at, the 4 that we came to, have varying capacity. The largest of those would provide more than double that amount, which would be the Flanagan Creek, the largest.
Annually?
Annually. Okay. The smallest of those would be in the neighborhood of about 50% of that particular volume and that demand. So that does have some influence upon how you might use the water depending on which reservoir site or which basin would be selected. I see a question.
Excuse me, Walter.
Direct use in potable system currently includes our irrigation water. Is that in these numbers?
In the next bullet there, you'll see the non-potable use for irrigation. Within that 2550, we estimate approximately 700 acre-feet per year is irrigation. Okay. So yes, within that 2,500 is the irrigation component.
Okay.
All right. So with the number of 720 acre-feet per year is an estimate of the typical annual amount of potable water that is used currently for irrigation. It raises a question or an alternative in terms of use of could we do something where we would replace potable water with a lower quality water, if you will, and use it for irrigation. So that is one of the alternatives as well. The third alternative is a combination, if you will, of use of essentially potable water, potable quality water, with some form of an aquifer storage. That method of aquifer storage is certainly not defined at this point. It's something that we would have to consider very closely as we move forward. It could be in the form of a enhanced recharge area, if that can be identified and made to work appropriately. It could be in the form of an aquifer storage and recovery system, which is more of a direct injection system, and some other options out there. I should mention that in the case of this study, in order to be able to make comparisons between alternatives, The consultants chose, and I think with our blessing, if you will, chose to use the Aquifer Storage and Recovery, ASR, methodology, where it's a direct injection, simply because it is probably easier to put numbers to it at this stage. We're at an estimating stage, a preliminary concept stage. The idea of enhanced recharge facilities vary tremendously depending on where they are, what their scope is, what their scale is, so it's very hard to put numbers to it. So for the purpose of this study at this stage, it's an aquifer injection type system. Another question?
Okay, Dan's question.
This has been brought up before, this recharge setup for the aquifer. What is an example of one? Are there any local examples of this or any examples throughout the nation of this happening?
Yeah. I'm not aware of any locally. I believe there are a number of places throughout the country where some form of enhanced recharge does occur. There are areas where the soil conditions perhaps are a bit more conducive, and so high water flows are directed to areas that then have a tendency to recharge into an aquifer. Maybe it's a shallow aquifer in some cases. It's out there. It is utilized. Again, I'm not familiar with any locally.
Okay.
So it's going to be a challenge, but it's something to consider. On the water treatment side, there's really two options. The first is conventional treatment. This could be something like a sand filtration unit, similar to what we have now with our green sand filtration out at the water plant. The advantages of conventional is they're less expensive. They have a lower capital cost to construct. The disadvantage is they require a lot of operator activity and monitoring and higher operations costs, so you have to be on site frequently to make sure that they are performing in the manner they're intended. Another alternative is a membrane type system, a little higher capital cost up front. The advantage, of course, is a lower operations cost. They can be automated more readily. They require less presence by the operators. So if, for instance, we were operating a treatment facility up at a reservoir site, which is remote from the staff, typically the membrane would be a better choice in that case. For this study, the membrane method was selected with the idea that if we get to a decision point that it makes sense to bring a facility into town, we could always step back cost-wise to a conventional treatment method. Obviously, the location of the facilities can affect how we work operationally and what those costs are involved. And there's the membrane. As for the dams and the facilities themselves, we looked at two different versions. One is the 40-foot height maximum. 40 foot is, again, that kind of a magic number under the Idaho Department of Water Resources regulations. Above 40 feet, you move out of the intermediate size into a different set of regulations, a bit more difficult to comply with. So we looked at, okay, if we can stay within that intermediate size for one case, and then if we went to a full height, which essentially would be whatever either the basin can handle or whatever height's necessary to meet the volume we're trying to achieve. For this stage of the study, we scaled back from what is the maximum possible to what would it take to store 1.5 times the annual watershed production. So if the watershed can produce 2,000 acre-feet a year, we would size the reservoir at 3,000 acre-feet. What height dam does that take? Okay. In doing that, the height of the dams range from about 92 feet up to 111, which is actually not bad for facilities of this type. Earth-fill dams reach that, and others certainly that, and much higher. With those layout options, the length of the dams varies, of course, based on the individual site, roughly 700 feet to just shy of 1,200, resulting in impoundment areas of between 33 and about 180 acres, so quite a bit of variation there, and volumes anywhere from 1,300 acre-feet up to 660 acre-feet for full-height dams. 40-footers, we actually go down to as little as 385 acre-feet in one of the options.
So, Les, for those who might just follow up on the audio, that impoundment volume, I think you misspoke and said 660, so 6,600.
Yeah, 1,300 to 6,600, excuse me.
Yeah,
Thank you.
okay.
Thank you for that. On the cost side, cost projections at this stage are very preliminary, a bit challenging because it's really that 50,000-foot level, so they have a very limited accuracy, and there are some disclaimers, of course, when you look at cost estimates at this stage. But they did the best job they could considering where we were at, and they utilized unit prices from existing projects, recent projects, so the numbers are realistic. Added a 20% contingency, 15% for the E&A. The various alternatives that are being considered, the 8 that are proposed, range anywhere from $5 million up to $68 million. As you would expect, the $68 million is going to be the larger facilities on the north side. The $5 million is an option on the south side of Moscow Mountain. And I see another question.
Walter.
Your $5 million to $68 million, is that impoundment only or all-inclusive?
I will touch on all of that. It's all-inclusive at this point. Okay.
Carry on.
The price per acre foot, which is a way to do a comparison, ranges substantially, as you can see there, from a little over $8,000 per acre foot up to $24,000 per acre foot. One of the challenges of surface water facilities like this is they tend to be expensive as compared to alternative supply. And by that I mean groundwater. Groundwater is still the least expensive way, typically, to provide water to a system. So as an example, just for comparison's sake, the well number 10 project, which is coming up, has an estimated cost of about $2.3 million to drill the well and develop the well site. If it pumps 2,500 gallons per minute, which is what well 9 does today, and if that rate were to be continuous for a year, works out to about 4,000 acre feet of water. So you do the math, and that works down to about $570 per acre foot as compared to the $8,000 to $24,000 per acre foot range. So obviously surface water has a much higher cost. Part of that is conveyance. We have to carry that water some distance to get to the community. Part of it is just the nature of building facilities of that size. So if you're looking at it purely from a financial perspective, groundwater is still the least costly way to go and a preferred method in that regard. Obviously, in the city of Moscow, we have some other issues and concerns as it relates to the longevity of the aquifer system. And so it may be that even though groundwater is less expensive, it is not the preferred way to go. So we would consider surface water even at a higher cost if that achieves other goals and objectives for the community.
So, Les, one of the scenarios you showed was the South Fork of the Palouse River with surface conveyance, and does that do these numbers take into account land acquisition for protection of that?
The land
surface
acquisition, I'm not sure I can answer that question. I think you stumped me.
Maybe that's in Section B.
It might be.
I don't know.
Well,
Okay, that's all right, thanks.
The study did not get very far into land acquisition issues. It does talk about the fact that a lot of the property involved for the reservoir sites, the dam sites, and some of the conveyance, is on private property. And so there would be some kind of either an acquisition or control aspect that would have to occur in order for these facilities to move forward. Mm-hmm. So I don't think at this stage that those costs are in these numbers. But I can't say that definitively, but I think that's the situation. So. All right. I'm going to go ahead and zip through the alternatives just so you get an idea of what they are and the scale. I'm doing it just in a tabular form here, so trying to, again, not to belabor all of this too long, but I'll just jump into it.
That's what height?
The Flanagan Creek site to the north would have a dam that's in the neighborhood of the 100-foot. So this is the full-size facility in order to provide at least 1.5 times the capacity of the watershed. Right? This is the largest facility. 6,600 acre feet would be the size of the impoundment. It would require just shy of a 13-mile pipeline to take it up over Moscow Mountain and deliver it to the city of Moscow with 2 pump stations along the way. There would be a treatment facility located somewhere along the route, either back at the reservoir site or possibly in town. One of the advantages of the north side facilities is once they come up over the mountain, we have a tremendous amount of head differential from the top of the mountain down to the city. So there's potential to put inline hydropower generation facilities. So you could pull back some of the energy that you use in the pumping operation, perhaps a little revenue to go along with that. The other advantage from a purely engineering side is that it reduces the pressure in the system. It uses a lot of head to run a hydro facility, and so the pressure drops as you pass through those facilities. So you get back down to a manageable pressure by the time you get into the city, rather than running up at maybe 190 psi. So
Now, this is where you see the engineer start smiling. This is really cool stuff.
This is fun.
That's good stuff. That's good stuff. So, this particular option, obviously one of them in the higher range, pushing 55 million. This type of a facility is significant. And the study recommends, and I would agree, that if we were to pursue something like this, we would probably want to consider doing it on a regional basis. Perhaps we team with other water purveyors within the area in some form to essentially share in the cost and share in the ability of the watershed to provide a pretty significant amount of water for the basin.
So
Dan?
we're probably talking more municipalities or current water sewer districts rather than private ownership along the pipe? I mean, or is there a potential for that as well?
Well, in terms of a regional facility, I would think the larger purveyors, the cities, the universities.
This you'd be
folks,
Potlatch and Viola probably.
potentially, yeah.
Tossing in on it.
As far as could you provide service to small scale along the route, I suppose there's possibilities of that. You might encounter some time of use
Or would they have
issues.
to set up some sort of maybe smaller water districts along the route?
That might be helpful.
Tom?
For a facility that's got 6,600 acre-feet of water, how much of that is usable water in a given year, so that you're not just like taking it all the way down to the mud puppies on the bottom of the...
Well, it depends a lot on the configuration of the basin itself,
Okay.
right? What type of sedimentation
Right.
occurs within the basin? Because there's going to be a certain segment of that water at the base that you're not really going to want to draw off. As you say, you get down to the mud puppies, if you will. That percentage is going to vary quite a bit depending on the shape of the basin itself. On some of the smaller facilities, you might see it go pretty low. And on a large one like this, unless you're using everybody within the Palouse Basin, you probably wouldn't see it drop that significantly.
Walter?
Is the reservoir at Snoqualmie a source of water for Seattle? The one they draw down into the mud every year?
The
this-
Right by the interstate.
Cachilas?
Lake
Cachilas?
Cachess?
Cachis? I think it's, yeah.
No.
That is a source of water. I don't think it's for Seattle. I think that goes east, I believe.
But that one is drawn down to where you've got mud flats.
Yeah, it certainly is on the upper ends of it, absolutely. Second alternative, this is the Hatter Creek, and the second largest of the facilities, 3,600 acre-feet. Again, a long pipeline, in this case 24 miles, with 2 pump stations to get it up over the top of the ridge. Treatment facilities, again, an option for hydropower. The most expensive of the options, as you would expect with essentially double the pipeline length, there's a lot of cost associated with that. Yes.
Wes, when you talk about these costs, like the costs for the pipeline and that, and you're saying the 67.5 million, that's the first year. I mean, once you built the pipe, you're not counting that cost again every year.
This is construction cost.
Yeah, okay.
So there would be operational cost for these northern facilities. They're fairly extensive. I mean, yeah, they're fairly extensive. I didn't bring those numbers. They're in the study. I'm not as familiar with those, but yeah, they do. They do have to play into your consideration about what we choose in the end. South Fork Palouse, so this is the first of the south side, option A3, an impoundment of about 1,300 acre-feet, so considerably smaller, roughly half of what we use in a given year. So this is the 50% option, if you will. Smaller system, shorter pipeline, no pumps in this case. It could gravity flow on into the city. The downside of that, of course, is we probably wouldn't have opportunity for the hydropower. There just isn't enough fall to take advantage of that. And then treatment facilities. So the prices drop here quite a bit due to size of the reservoir itself, size of the dam, lack of pump stations, and then proximity to the city. So we're down into the 25, 26 million range, which is still a fair bit. Walter.
Madam Mayor, I think the question you asked about this one was to do it without a pipeline, to use the channel. I have no idea. Does that require getting ownership of the channel, or can you just put water in a channel that exists and take it out of the far end if you've got a water right?
Right. You can utilize the existing river channels for conveyance, and one of the options here touches on that.
Okay.
Right. My question was more about, you wouldn't want people to build fuel stations on the banks.
I don't think they can do
or
that
something
now
like
anyway.
that. Right. That's true. That's true.
Yeah, all those are important issues
Yeah.
along the way.
But you still can have runoff from,
Well, farmers' fields that are on there now.
So, and I should mention, all of these A alternatives, these are potable systems. These are designed to go right to the potable distribution system at the city. So that's why you're not seeing open conveyance, you're seeing piped conveyance. So
Okay.
once we treat it,
Yeah.
it's good all the way. And wherever we choose to
right,
disperse the water along the way, it's ready to go.
yeah.
So
Tom
Felton
had a-
Creek is the last of those potable
Tom had a
options
question, too.
up front. I'm sorry.
So that's okay. So we wouldn't get any head on the south side. We wouldn't be able to do hydropower, but would we have enough elevation change gradient to, for conveyance, even if we didn't use the channel? Like if we had a pipeline, would there be enough elevation change to just feed the system without having to pump it?
No.
Yes.
Well, that one says a pump.
On South Fork Palouse,
No pump. Okay.
no pump. So
Okay.
that is the one.
The one that we could do.
That the gradient and
It is
the
enough.
topography is such that it can have a straight shot.
Because it's
into
within the watershed, and
into the
if
system.
we,
Right.
if
So
it was the other side, we'd have to throw it over the, okay, great.
once you
thanks.
get to Felton Creek, there's a little
Yep.
ridge in between.
Okay.
Now we're back to having a pumped situation. Impoundment here of 2,000 acre feet, about 10 miles of pipeline with one pump and a treatment facility.
Okay.
So there is a little ridge you have to pop up and over for the Felton Creek route.
Okay, thanks.
About 33 million on that option. So again, the South Fork for the potable water, just direct use type systems, the South Fork is the least costly overall in capital. It's not the least costly per acre foot.
Yeah, that's what I'm
The
wondering.
large scale ones are less expensive per acre foot,
okay.
but the overall massive size of the project obviously gives it its own challenge.